The afternoon, I caught Sloane rearranging my living room furniture. I knew right away my son had slipped her a spare key. No heads up, no ringing the doorbell. I just walked into my own house with my arms full of groceries, and there she was, stripping my mantle of my framed family photos to make room for some ultra-modern, geometric vases she'd bought. I'm 65 years old. I've been a widow for 10 years, and I fiercely cherish the peace and quiet of my own space. Seeing my daughter-in-law parading around like she owned the place made my blood run cold. But I didn't yell. I just set my grocery bags down on the kitchen island, crossed my arms, and watched her. "Oh, Vivian, you're home," she mumbled without even looking at me, dragging one of my armchairs toward the window. "Nolan gave me a key for emergencies, but I figured I'd use the afternoon to give this place a little facelift. It smells like mothballs and old memories in here." My son, Nolan, was always a peacemaker to a fault. He would bend over backward and cave to Sloane's domineering personality just to avoid a fight. I knew that, but my house was my hard line. I walked slowly over to the mantel, grabbed her trendy new vases, and shoved them right back into the brown paper bag she'd brought them in. Then, I put the picture of my late husband back exactly where it belonged. "Emergencies are for fires and ambulances. Sloane," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. "Take your things and go." She scowled, visibly deeply offended. She whipped out her phone to call Nolan right then and there, whining that I was being hostile and painfully old-fashioned. I waited for him to get off work that evening to demand an explanation. Nolan walked through the front door dragging his feet, sporting the same evasive, guilty look he used to get when he broke a window as a kid. "Mom, it's just a spare key," he stammered, scratching the back of his neck. "Sloane just wants you to have some company. You should be happy she cares so much about the house." I didn't argue. I didn't burst into tears about feeling completely violated in my own sanctuary. I simply gave a slow nod, letting them believe the issue was dropped. What they didn't know was that I was already drawing up a game plan. The next morning, Sloane came right back. But this time, she didn't bring vases. She brought a stack of moving boxes to set up her home office. Sloane had apparently decided that my sewing room, the sunlit space where I spent my mornings reading and altering clothes, was the perfect spot for her new remote work setup. She marched in with 3 heavy boxes of files, an ergonomic mesh chair, and a massive dual monitor setup. Nolan trailed in right behind her, carrying the heavy stuff with his head hung low. "It'll just be Monday through Friday." "Mom," my son muttered, refusing to make eye contact. "The Wi-Fi at our apartment is a nightmare, and the lighting is way better in here." I leaned against the door frame. Sloane was already shoving my vintage sewing machine into a dusty corner to make room for her desk. I took a deep breath. A lot of mothers would have completely lost their temper, screaming about the disrespect, or crying about being pushed out. I preferred direct action. I turned on my heel, walked to my master bedroom, and dug out the spare credit card tied to my account with Nolan's name on it. I'd given it to him 3 years ago for car emergencies. But lately, I'd noticed a few mysterious charges at upscale bistros and home decor boutiques. I pulled up my banking app on my phone and canceled the card with a single tap. That afternoon, I met my sister, Lorraine, for coffee. I laid out the whole situation for her without raising my voice once. Lorraine, who has always been the hothead of the family, told me I needed to change the locks before the sun went down. "All in good time," I told her, taking a slow sip of my latte. "If I react with anger, I become the villain. If I react with order, I protect what is mine. When I got home at dusk, Nolan and Sloane were gone. I walked straight into my sewing room, picked up Sloane's boxes, her fancy monitors, and her ergonomic chair, and hauled it all out to the back porch. I threw a heavy-duty waterproof tarp over the pile so the morning dew wouldn't ruin it, and slapped a heavy padlock on the sewing room door. My phone rang bright and early the next morning. It was Nolan, frantic. "Mom, why is Sloane's office gear sitting outside? And why did my credit card get declined at the gas station?" "Because my house is not a commercial office building, and my bank account is not a slush fund for your wife's whims," I answered coolly. "Have a great day at work." I hung up. I thought that boundary was crystal clear, but Sloane wasn't the type to throw in the towel that easily. A couple of weeks went by with relative peace and quiet. Then, on a Friday night, Nolan and Sloane showed up on my porch holding 2 large pepperoni pizzas. Sloane's entire demeanor had flipped. She was laying on this sugary sweet friendliness that felt incredibly fake. She smiled too wide and used a syrupy tone that just didn't suit her. We sat down in the dining room. Lorraine happened to be visiting, and she just sat there, narrowing her eyes at the two of them. "Vivian, we've been doing a lot of thinking about you," Sloane started, placing her hand over Nolan's on the table. "You're all alone in this massive house. It must be so exhausting to clean and maintain at your age." Nolan cleared his throat and picked up the script. "Yeah, Mom, we think it makes the most sense for the family if we just move in here with you. We'd take care of all the heavy lifting. You could take the small guest room by the back alley, and we'd take the master suite. That way, you wouldn't have to worry about climbing the stairs with your knees." Lorraine let out a sharp, incredulous bark of laughter, but I held up a hand to silence her. I looked at my son. He had grown into a man who always looked for the easiest way out, and his wife had figured out how to use my home as their personal life raft. "Move in here?" I asked, casually picking up a slice of pizza. "Exactly," Sloane jumped in, her eyes practically gleaming with greed. "We've already started boxing up the apartment. We can bring the first load over this weekend." They were trying to disguise a total takeover as dutiful family care. They were asking me to shrink my life down to a single back room so they could sprawl out and live rent-free. I didn't say no. I didn't even get mad. I just dabbed my mouth with a napkin and said, "Interesting proposal. I'll think about it." They shot each other a triumphant look. They genuinely mistook my silence for submission, assuming the years had worn me down enough to just hand over the reins. They left that night giddily discussing what color they were going to paint my living room walls. The second the front door clicked shut, Lorraine whipped around to face me. "Are you actually going to let those vultures move in?" "Of course not," I said, walking over to the landline. "But if they want to play house and make big decisions, I'm about to make a few of my own." I was already dialing the number of a contractor I'd trusted for years. At 8 o'clock sharp the next morning, a remodeling crew pulled into my driveway, but they weren't here to paint Sloane's new living room. I walked them straight to the small back bedroom, the one with the private entrance facing the alleyway. For years, it had just been a dusty guest room gathering junk. I hired them to frame out a wall to completely separate it from the main house, throw in a small kitchenette, and update the plumbing. I was turning it into a completely independent studio apartment. When Nolan stopped by a few days later, he saw the drywall going up and smiled with sheer relief. "Mom, I knew you'd see reason," he said, patting my shoulder awkwardly. "That room is going to be perfect for you. It's tiny, but it's really cozy." "Yes, it's going to turn out wonderfully," I replied vaguely. handing him a glass of ice water. Meanwhile, Sloan was already burning through the rent money they thought they were about to save. Amazon boxes started flooding my porch, high-end Egyptian cotton sheets, expensive blackout curtains, and luxury countertop appliances, all addressed to Nolan, but obviously handpicked by her. I just carried them into the garage and stacked them up, unopened. In my downtime, I started auditing my finances with a fine-tooth comb. I sat in my home office, pulled out a thick blue folder, and gathered my arsenal. I had the original deed to the house solely in my name after my husband passed. I printed decades of bank statements proving I was the one who had paid for every shingle, every property tax bill, and every burst pipe. But that wasn't all. I'd been keeping an eye on the mail arriving at my address with Nolan's name on it. Bank letters, overdue notices. I didn't open them, but the bold red envelopes from collection agencies were unmistakable. Their sudden, burning desire to take care of me had nothing to do with family. They were drowning in debt. The crew finished the studio apartment in a record-breaking 2 weeks. The house was quiet again, but the peace was short-lived. That very afternoon, Sloan crossed the point of no return. I was walking back from the neighborhood bakery when I saw a local moving box truck idling in front of my house. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my stride even. I walked through the front door and found 2 burly, strange men trying to deadlift my late husband's solid oak desk. Sloan was standing over them, barking orders. "Watch the door frame. The buyer is going to pitch a fit if you scratch the finish," she snapped, pointing aggressively. "Put it down. Right now," I ordered. My voice didn't shake. I didn't yell. But the absolute cold authority in my tone made the 2 guys drop the desk immediately. Sloan spun around, startled, but quickly shifting to defiant. "Vivian, this monstrosity takes up half the room. Nolan and I bought a massive sectional for this corner. I sold this online. You should be thanking me. I got great money for it to help with the household bills." I looked at the 2 movers. "Gentlemen, I apologize for wasting your time, but this piece of furniture is not for sale. I strongly suggest you leave." Sensing the nuclear tension in the room, they didn't say a word. They just slipped out the front door. Once it was just the 2 of us. Sloan crossed her arms, rolling her eyes. "You can't be this selfish. Nolan and I need the space. Besides, this is Nolan's house too. He has a right to make changes." There it was. The delusion that so many entitled relatives cling to. The belief that you can claim an inheritance while the person is still breathing. "Get out of my house," I told her, pointing to the door. "Excuse me." She let out a breathy, nervous laugh. "I said, get out of my house. You are not welcome here today." Her face flushed a deep, ugly red. She snatched her purse off the counter and stomped toward the entryway. Right before she crossed the threshold, she turned back, sneering. "We are moving in this Saturday, whether you like it or not. Nolan already terminated our lease." I shut the door in her face. Her threat didn't scare me. It gave me the exact deadline I needed. She had just pulled the pin on the grenade I'd been holding. Courtesy was officially off the table. It was time to lock down the fortress. I was up before the sun the next morning. I drove straight to a local locksmith I've known for years, a no-nonsense guy named Stan. I hired him to come over and swap out every single exterior lock. I didn't want any of those smart locks with apps that could be hacked or shared. I wanted heavy-duty, commercial-grade deadbolts. The kind where the keys can't be duplicated without a special authorization card, which I tucked safely into my wallet. While Stan was drilling, I drove to the bank. I completely removed Nolan as an emergency contact and wiped him off the last lingering joint account we'd had since he was in college. I didn't leave him access to a single dime of my money. When I got home, I grabbed my blue folder and sat at the dining room table to review my handiwork. The deed was inside. I stacked Nolan's red collection notices next to it. And finally, I added one brand new document I had signed the afternoon prior, a residential lease agreement. That brand new studio apartment I'd built in the back. It wasn't empty. I had rented it out to a quiet, respectful medical student who had eagerly paid 6 months' rent up front. My boundaries weren't drawn with screaming matches or tears. They were built with concrete, steel, and legally binding paper. For the rest of the week, I ghosted Nolan's calls and ignored Sloane's passive-aggressive text messages. I just focused on tending my garden and drinking tea with Lorraine, who was thoroughly enjoying the show. Saturday morning arrived. I was out front watering my rose bushes when Nolan's SUV pulled up to the curb. The trunk was packed to the roof with garbage bags of clothes, suitcases, and disassembled IKEA furniture. Sloane hopped out of the passenger seat, flashing a smug, victorious smile. Clutching the old spare key Nolan had originally given her, they marched right up to the front door, totally ignoring me. Sloane slid the key in. She tried to turn it. Nothing. She pulled it out, blew on the metal, and jammed it back in, wiggling it with aggressive frustration. When it dawned on them that the entire lock hardware was completely different, they both slowly turned to face me in the yard. The moment of truth had arrived. I walked slowly up the walkway, casually drying my hands on a gardening towel. Nolan looked like he'd seen a ghost. Sloane's face was twisted in pure, unadulterated outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" "Mom," Nolan asked, his voice cracking between panic and anger. "The key won't turn. Did you change the locks?" "Sure did," I replied. Stopping at the bottom of the porch stairs, Sloane lunged forward, gesturing wildly at the packed SUV. "This isn't funny. Vivian, we handed over our apartment keys yesterday. These boxes weigh a ton. Tell her to give us the new keys. Nolan, now." Nolan took a shaky breath, trying to summon a man-of-the-house voice he'd never actually possessed. "Mom, just give us the keys. We're moving in today. We have nowhere else to go. We need to get into our house. You can take a seat on the patio furniture," I told them calmly. "I have something to show you before you keep making grand plans for someone else's property." "I don't want to sit. I want to go inside," Sloane shrieked, totally dropping the sweet daughter-in-law act. "Sloane, if you pitch a fit on my front lawn, I'm calling a tow truck to remove that vehicle blocking my driveway. Sit down. Both of you." The absolute ice in my voice stunned them. Nolan, entirely used to obeying whoever spoke with the most authority, slumped into one of the wicker porch chairs. Sloane hesitated, breathing heavily, but finally stomped over and sat down, crossing her arms furiously. I went inside using my new master key, opening the door just a crack to slip through, and came back out holding the thick blue folder. I sat across from them. The morning air was crisp. I had all the time in the world. They thought that if they just applied enough pressure, I'd fold. They were about to learn that a quiet woman is not a weak woman. I laid the blue folder flat on the glass patio table and opened it, allowing myself a small smile. The first piece of paper I slid across the glass toward Nolan was a copy of the deed. "This is my house, paid off, in full, by your father and me," I said, keeping my voice low and deliberate so every word landed. "It is not yours. It is not Sloane's. And it is absolutely not a retirement plan for your financial screw-ups. We know that," Sloane snapped. "But it's Nolan's inheritance. It's just the natural order of things. An inheritance is for when I'm in the ground, I shot back, staring a hole straight through her. And my health is excellent. Next, I pulled out the stack of red collection envelopes and fanned them out on the table. The last drop of color drained from my son's face. These have been arriving for weeks. Maxed out credit cards, defaulted personal loans. I continued, tapping the envelopes. You thought you could ditch your rent, hijack my house, and force me to live in a closet while you bailed yourselves out on my dime. Nolan swallowed hard, his eyes darting away. Mom, We lost a ton of money on one of Sloane's crypto investments. We were desperate, and your solution was to force me out of my own space and pawn off your father's antique furniture. I stated flatly. I felt zero pity. We have a right to stay here. Sloane exploded, standing up. We don't have an apartment anymore. What are we supposed to do? You literally built that back room for us. That was the absolute best part. I pulled out the final document, the signed lease agreement. The back room has been leased to a medical student for the last 3 days. Her rent covers my property taxes and maintenance. I explained, snapping the blue folder shut with a sharp thwack that echoed across the porch. You do not have a key. You do not have a room. And you do not have a home here. Those words completely dismantled the master plan they'd been banking on. Sloane stared at the papers, then stared at Nolan, waiting for him to pull off some kind of miracle. But there was nothing left to say. Reality hit them like a freight train, and I held all the cards. The silence on the porch was deafening. When Sloane finally realized there was no financial bailout and no free ride coming, she snapped. She stood up so fast she knocked the wicker chair over. You are a despicable, selfish, old woman, she screamed. She rounded on Nolan. Do something. Don't just let your mother treat us like this. Nolan looked at me with pathetic, pleading eyes. Mom, please. Just for a couple of months. We'll sleep on the living room floor. I picked up my folder, perfectly calm. No. I suggest you find a cheap motel or call Sloane's parents. Oh, and the boxes for her office that I left under the tarp out back. You can haul those away right now. Sloane let out a guttural sound of frustration. She finally understood that I wasn't the fragile, compliant mother-in-law she could steamroll. She stormed over to the SUV and slammed the passenger door so hard the windows rattled. Nolan lingered for a second longer. I never thought you'd actually turn your back on me, he mumbled, pulling out the guilt trip as his last resort. I'm not turning my back on you, Nolan. I'm stepping aside so you can stop hiding behind me, I replied firmly. It's time you face the consequences of your own choices. Goodbye. I turned around, walked inside, and locked the heavy deadbolt behind me. A couple of minutes later, I heard the SUV engine roar to life and the squeal of tires as they sped down the street. I walked into my kitchen, put the kettle on for some Earl Grey, and sat in the quiet. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the suffocating shadow of their entitlement looming over my sanctuary. I had reclaimed my home, and I hadn't given up a single inch. Later that week, I boxed up all the luxury linens and appliances they'd shipped to my house and freight shipped them straight to Sloane's parents' garage. There were no more screaming matches. But a week later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Nolan, proving the fallout was still happening, but this time, I was safely watching from the shore. Nolan's text was painfully brief. Sloane went to stay with her parents. She said she can't be with a guy who can't even put a roof over her head. I'm crashing on a buddy's couch. I'm sorry. Mom. I read the message while I was watering the ferns on my patio. I didn't take any joy in his heartbreak, but I also didn't feel the burning, maternal urge to rush in and rescue him. I texted back, I hope this teaches you to be more careful about who you hand the keys to your life. To let me know when you pick up a second job to start tackling that debt. I didn't offer him my couch. You don't learn the lesson if someone pulls you out of the ditch before you figure out why you drove into it in the first place. The months that followed were an absolute blessing. My tenant, the med student, turned out to be an absolute sweetheart. She was quiet as a mouse, but every now and then she'd leave a plate of freshly baked brownies by the patio door. Lorraine started coming over more often, and we'd spend entire afternoons drinking wine in the sewing room that was, once again, exclusively mine. I never received another demand about how I should be living my life. Sloane's aggressive attempt to hijack my home and my son's cowardly silence taught me an invaluable lesson. A mother's love does not mean being a doormat for your children's mistakes. At 65, I finally understood that my house was so much more than just wood and drywall. It was the testament of my late husband's hard work, the sanctuary of my golden years, and the one place on earth where my rules were the only ones that mattered. Sometimes, protecting what is yours means gravely disappointing the people who felt entitled to take it. If you ever feel like you are being backed into a corner in your own home, don't argue, don't cry, and whatever you do, don't beg. Change the locks, lock down your paperwork, and remember that you are the undisputed architect of your own peace. That's my advice to you. Coming from a house that is and always will be mine alone.